There's something rotten in the state of Denmark, but how does Hamlet choose to deal with it? I discuss this and more on today's episode. Welcome back to Around the Weird, a booktube channel where I talk about all the unusual and out of the ordinary literature that I have found in my travels. Today I want to talk about a play that I read, one from an author that I've talked about on this channel before. I've been reading a lot of this person's work. And today's story is all about sad princes and vengeance and ghosts and things of that nature. I am referring, of course, to Hamlet by William Shakespeare, which was published around 1603. However, there are different editions that were published at different times in Shakespeare's life. So I'm just choosing to use 1603. And my edition comes from the updated Folger Shakespeare Library. No idea what that is. And it was edited by Barbara Moat and Paul Werstein, which is very important because who translates or edits or anything like that, often determines meaning. I don't know too much about these people, but for those who don't know, William Shakespeare was a British writer who lived in the 15 and 1600s. He was known for writing plays. He got his start with sonnets before moving on to plays, mainly writing sort of like for the theater, like not really writing down an exact format of his plays. That came much later. But he was still pretty regarded in his time and even worked with some other authors to fine-tune what he's worked on. And I've talked about Shakespeare on this channel before with Romeo and Juliet, Othello, Macbeth, Julius Caesar, A Comedy of Errors, among a couple others. And I've been having a good time. But it's been a fun opportunity to just explore more what Shakespeare has to say. But I'm enjoying it, and I definitely enjoyed Hamlet. I'm going to recommend it, but there's a good chance you probably read it out there. And if you haven't, make sure that you go to your local library, because that's where I found my copy. Don't forget to patronize your local libraries. They might have some understandable Shakespeare or like approachable Shakespeare, as opposed to just, the regular kind of Shakespeare, which doesn't bother explaining what any of it means. But without further ado, let's talk about Hamlet. I will do a summary, a little bit of analysis, and we will move on from there. So Hamlet, of course, focuses on Hamlet. He is a young prince who is sad, filled with grief at the start of the story because his father just died, the elder Hamlet. And he's also confused because his mother quickly married his uncle, Claudius, and he became king. And he's wondering why his mother didn't wait longer. It seems like he's the only one grieving. At the start of the story, we see that palace guards encounter what they believe to be a ghost. They think it's the elder Hamlet, so they tell Hamlet while he's sad. And meanwhile, Ophelia is warned by her father Polonius about Hamlet. She seems to be in love with him, but Hamlet is very emotional at this point. So he's just worried about her safety of getting attached to someone like Hamlet. And then Hamlet goes to outside the palace and sees the ghost, and the ghost claims to be his father, although there's no proof that that's what the ghost actually is. And the ghost talks about being betrayed by Claudius, and demands that Hamlet do vengeance for the ghost, which Hamlet agrees to and then tells the palace guards not to tell anyone else what happened here, because he doesn't want Claudius or the queen knowing. But we also see that the queen and Claudius are worried about Hamlet. Again, he's filled with a lot of grief. He's not really making any sense. Ophelia is saying he's just going on rants, and he's talking to something that isn't there, which indicates they can't see the ghost. And so they're just worried about what to do, and they're even considering sending him to England so that he can get a break from the goings-on in the palace. And then Hamlet believes that Claudius is guilty, so he makes plans for a play, The Murder of Gonzaga or The Mousetrap, which he believes will determine the guilt of Claudius. He gets into an argument with Ophelia where he just tells her that all women are bad and she should go to a nunnery and she's awful, just saying really unkind things to her. And then the troupe of actors that comes to the castle performs the mousetrap, and it's very obvious that the king is uncomfortable, which because Hamlet put a scene in there depicting like an assassination attempt, and so. Hamlet assumes this means guilt, and so he makes plans to kill the king, King Claudius, and get vengeance right there. Later, he approaches his queen about all of this, his mother about all of this, and he doesn't realize that Polonius is hiding behind like a tapestry. And so when he confronts his mother, she yelps, and then Polonius yelps too, which he believes to be the king, and he accidentally kills Polonius in the process. Claudius can't decide what to do with Hamlet, so he just decides to send him to England at this point for sureties, and he also makes plans to have Hamlet killed while he's there in order to be rid of that problem. However, as Hamlet is setting out, his ship is sort of captured by pirates, and he returns to Denmark. Ophelia also drowns at this point, which makes the family sad, but also Laertes is sad, who is her brother. And then Laertes returns from France, and Claudius and him plot against Hamlet, basically trying to ensnare him in a dueling contest, and Laertes is going to poison his sword. And indeed, Hamlet and Laertes duel, and Laertes manages to wound Hamlet, but the queen doesn't realize that one of the goblets that Claudius set out was actually a goblet of poison in case Hamlet actually won the duel. And she drinks it and proceeds to die. And then Hamlet manages to severely wound Laertes in the process as he himself is dying, and then he realizes that the queen is dead and he kills the king in a fit of rage, and then Hamlet himself unfortunately dies and talks to Horatio, one of his friends, before he dies. And as the story comes to a close, Fortinbras, who has sort of been in the process of invading the kingdom since the start of the story, finally invades the castle and chooses to honor Hamlet at this point, sort of ignoring the fact that he killed everyone in the process, and that's where the story ends there. In terms of analysis, vengeance. Every Shakespeare play has that one sort of emotion, or maybe two emotions, that sort of guide the play. In Romeo and Juliet, it's kind of love. In Julius Caesar, it would be, betrayal or something like that. And Macbeth, it would be ambition. And here you see vengeance sort of guiding Hamlet throughout the play. Him kind of being fueled by it because he's so directed by his grief that he can't really see anything else. And indeed, grief is another part of this story. Hamlet's grief in particular is something that Shakespeare focuses on quite a bit. Hamlet is mourning the loss of his father, something that I'm sure many people are familiar with. And he's also somewhat of a teenager. I think he's described around 19 years old. So a young man dealing with the loss of someone he loved. And it's kind of hard for him to maybe navigate those feelings. But on top of that, there's a sense of confusion for Hamlet because the queen chose to marry Claudius pretty quickly. And so for Hamlet, there's like this feeling of, did dad mean nothing to you? There's a feeling of like, why are you so quick to do this? Maybe there's something else going on, and Hamlet can't really figure this out. So there's that grief and confusion kind of melting together to make life really miserable for Hamlet. I love how Shakespeare sort of captures that emotion, that combination of emotion there. And this grief also turns to self-loathing and anger. He doesn't really like himself, and he especially doesn't like others. He's angry. He lashes out at others and himself, especially at Ophelia. Ophelia doesn't seem to be doing anything to him. She kind of loves him, and Hamlet's like, we all die. Get yourself to a nunnery. Leave me alone. Women are a disease. Kind of projecting his feelings at his mother on Ophelia, and he's pushing everyone away, further isolating himself. It's not good for your mental health. And again, like, Shakespeare's doing a really good job of capturing that sort of feeling. He's kind of a dramatic teenager in a way. I know a lot of people have this idea that Hamlet is a noble prince and whatnot, but I feel like what Shakespeare is actually going for is this dramatic teenager who overreacts to the point where he's doing these dangerous things. And even more so, there's never really any proof that that Claudius killed his mother. Killed his father. There is that sort of confession that we see in like one of the acts where Claudius admits to it, but that's Claudius to himself. Hamlet never really gets definitive proof that that's what happened, and yet he just assumes, like, he just believes anything that he hears. And nobody really knows how to deal with Hamlet. His mom wants to care for him, but I don't think she has the know-how to do so. It's kind of that hands-off type of parenting, especially for someone who's so young, or kind of a young adult like Hamlet, who people think should know better. And especially Claudius doesn't know what to do with him. He just wants to send him to England and be done with him. But there is a really good quote that gets at that feeling of not knowing what to do with Hamlet. Allow me to read it to you. "'Tis sweet and commendable in your nature, Hamlet, to give these mourning duties to your father. But you must know your father lost a father, that father lost his, and the survivor bound in filial obligation for some term to do obsequious sorrow. But to persevere in obstinate condolement is a course of impious stubbornness. 'Tis unmanly grief. It shows a will most incorrect to heaven, a heart unfortified, a mind impatient, an understanding simple and unschooled." And that's Claudius talking to Hamlet there, saying, it's understandable that you want to grieve for your father, but that sorrow will take you out if it's not guided. Like, it'll possess you, and it'll cloud your mind, and you won't be able to focus on what you need to focus on. It's a remarkable sort of acknowledgement of mental health before they really had the terms for that. And Claudius is like, just, hey, let's talk about this. Let's help you, guide you through your grief, because you shouldn't really be suffering alone. But of course, Hamlet's a dramatic teenager, so he's going to be a dramatic teenager. And also, Shakespeare kind of portrays Hamlet as this wayward young man who needs help and never really receives it. The tragedy of Hamlet, the tragedy that most Shakespeare characters befall, where they need help and they just don't get it at that crucial point. And so, rather than sort of these popular interpretations of Hamlet as a noble prince getting vengeance, it's much more realistic to depict him as he actually is, and that's a sad, broken young man who just isn't reached out to in time to prevent all this chaos and death from happening. It's also important to talk about the ghost in Hamlet. I like how in the introduction the writers acknowledge that nobody really knows what the ghost is. Like, there is that obvious implication that the ghost is Hamlet's father. That the suggestion that that's what it might be, and that you could read this as straightforward, like a ghost shows up, tells Hamlet to kill, to get vengeance for the father dying, and that's it. But there's a lot of other suggestions by the authors that it could be a little bit more than that. The editors, that it could be more than that. It could be a hallucination. Again, Hamlet's dealing with a lot of mental health stuff, a lot of grief, and this could be a stress or grief-induced hallucination where he's the only one really experiencing this kind of ghost. That doesn't kind of work because the palace guards see it, but they could just be seeing things in the middle of the night, and Hamlet could just be honing in on that of what they think they see. But it's important to note that the Queen and Ophelia both can't seem to see these ghosts, so it could just be a hallucination on Hamlet's part, leading him to act on what he already thinks might be true. You could also see it as a malevolent force, like a goblin demon, as I think they use in this book, like just an evil force that wants to get Hamlet to do something deeply evil for the sake of doing evil things. And indeed, it does succeed. But But it could also be sort of death itself, like death coming to get someone to do its duty for them. It also seems kind of interesting that Fortinbras, it shows up at the end of the story, where he's sort of proclaimed as this death-inducing force throughout, marching throughout Denmark to get to Hamlet's kingdom. And then at the end he shows up and it just like honors Hamlet maybe for doing all this death. Certainly not acknowledging the Hamlet that was, kind of painting him in a different light that way. But it could be death itself sort of showing up. I like how Shakespeare kind of leaves it open what this force is. And it's like you either see it as a ghost just asking for vengeance, not understanding the reality of the situation, or just the reality. Or it could just be, a malevolent force saying, hey, go kill these people, and just egging Hamlet on to cause more death and destruction. I also think Hamlet's conflict with Claudius is interesting in this story, because it seems to go deeper than murder. Obviously, like, Hamlet hates Claudius because he sees him as the murderer of his father, and Claudius doesn't want that to be realized, so he doesn't like Hamlet in that way, and he wants to send him to England to die. But it does seem like it's a little bit deeper than that, because Hamlet does seem to feel betrayed, but it also seems to be Oedipal, because like Claudius married his mom, and you could say that like maybe Hamlet wanted to marry his mom or something like that, and so you got that Freudian thing going on right there. And then for Claudius, besides the fact that, Hamlet wants to kill him, it does seem like he's afraid that, like, Hamlet's going to come for the throne as the true heir to this kingdom. And there's also that fear that, like, the killer might be killed. Like, he'll get his karmic retribution, or however you want to see it. So kind of a lot to explore with Hamlet and Claudius's sort of inimity, as I believe is the actual word for that. As I said that the ghost could represent death is indeed always on Hamlet's mind in this story. You have with the obvious example of the to be or not to be speech, where Hamlet basically thinks about how, there's life, there's death, and, we're always cruising towards death. It'll inevitably come for all of us, and that's all we can expect in the end. And then there's the speech with the gravediggers, where he's like, alas, poor Yorick, I knew him well. And just talking about how, like, all kings eventually become worm food, and those worms are eaten by the fishes, and then the fishermen get the fish, and so eventually the kings will be eaten by the fishermen, so you can see Hamlet's thinking a lot about death. Really gives an insight into his mental state, but this is one of the more darker, more gothic, I would say, Shakespeare plays. I think it's also important to reflect on Ophelia, too, in this story, how she can be a reflection of the queen in Hamlet's eyes. He just can't abide by Ophelia because she reminds him too much of his mother, and how she was untrue to his father, and so Hamlet's like, oh yeah, all women are the same now. Like, his misogyny is misplaced, I would say, and it causes him to push Ophelia away and do things that eventually just results in her maybe killing herself or something like that. And then she also kind of reflects that insanity, whereas Hamlet gets more and more depraved, she too becomes more and more depraved to the point of, again, wanting to kill herself, kind of being a harbinger to the overall death that is coming for this kingdom. Shakespeare does a really good job in writing Ophelia for the little amount of time that she shows up in this story. And then you also have the Greek mythology, not only that, but also the biblical references in this story, and Roman Greek mythology, all of that. Shakespeare really digs deep into the bag. You see that a lot in Shakespeare's plays, but you have like Niobe, you have references to Cain and Abel, you have references to Mercury and Hercules and all of that, sort of maybe indicating that Hamlet is a tool or a tool of destiny, a tool of fate, a plaything of the gods. So maybe ultimately he has very little control over what's happening to him. I personally don't like that interpretation, but I do think it's kind of there. And then there are a couple things that are kind of wonky with the Hamlet story. I do think that he returns really quickly from England. Like, it seems to be the very next scene. He's sent to England and then he comes back. It doesn't really seem like there's enough time for that to really be dwelled upon. Or for Hamlet to reflect of things in England, to sort of come to understand that his uncle is actually behind everything. But at the same time, that would undermine the story. It's better if Hamlet doesn't really know it and just sort of suspects it deep down. Because if it's verified, then he's righteous, and if it's not verified, then he's just an insane man who's just targeting everyone he thinks who's done him wrong, even if he is right, which he doesn't necessarily know. And also, there are pirates mentioned in this story, but they're not really given a chance to be characters. It's just like, oh, Hamlet was captured by pirates, but we're only going to tell you that through a letter. We're not actually going to reveal more about that, which could be interesting and could provide a sort of diametric opposite, or even support Hamlet's feelings on death or something like that. Would have been more if Shakespeare had elaborated on it, but it doesn't really sink it. I think it's just another aspect of this story that maybe needed a little bit more added to it. Anyway, those are my thoughts on Hamlet by William Shakespeare, a high-quality play. There's a reason it is considered a classic, getting at some very base human emotions of vengeance and grief and sadness and, just feeling betrayed by people as well. I highly recommend that if you read it, if you haven't done so already. I have a feeling a lot of people in high school, might have read it. I read parts of it, I think, but I hadn't read the entire thing. And it totally changes my opinion of the Hamlet play, because I had one mindset of it prior to reading it, but after reading the entire thing, I've come to view Hamlet in a different kind of light than maybe people typically paint Hamlet as. Again, painted as a very noble man, when actually he's just a young man who's kind of wayward in his ways. So I think it's very important that this is actually read. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Would love to hear from you and, have a discussion about Hamlet and Shakespeare. Otherwise, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so that more people can find out about Hamlet or Shakespeare if they don't already know. And again, I have a feeling this is very well known in Western cultures. And until then, I wish you the best of luck in your weird travels. Don't listen to ghosts that tell you to avenge them. Farewell.